Chapter 29. Luke waited until Mara had ducked through the opening before backing out of the room himself. "I believe this one's yours," he told her, shutting down her lightsaber and handing it across. "Thanks," she said, taking it as she passed his back to him. "Interesting grip yours has got. I think I like it better than mine." "You can keep that in mind when you get around to making your own someday," Luke said, digging her sleeve blaster out of his jacket and tossing it to her. "Here's your blaster. Watch out. Some of their people come equipped with Ysalamir backpacks." "I know," Mara said. She was at the door now, looking carefully out into the corridor. "Looks clear, but that won't last long. What's the plan? Back to the stairway?" "Unfortunately, I had the Quamjaw lock it down," Luke told her, stepping into the doorway beside her as he threw a last glance back at the opening he'd cut. He'd have thought one of the aliens, the Chiss, Mara had called them, might try for a final shot, but they had apparently decided to stay put, which meant Mara was right. They had something else planned. He looked down the corridor, stretching out with the Force as well. "Child of Winds, stay on top of R2, he told the Quamquay. "I don't want you getting lost." "Or getting in the way," Mara added. "So where are we going?" Before Luke could answer, R2 rolled out into the corridor, heading confidently off to the left with Child of Winds balanced precariously atop his dome. "I guess we're following R2, Luke said, setting off after them. "He must have been able to download the floor plan like I asked him to." "That or he's looking for a recharger," Mara muttered as she fell into step beside him. "How good are you at spotting individual Ysalamiri?" "Not as good as I am with groups of them," he conceded, stretching out with the Force. He could sense the grim activity all around them as the Chiss mobilized for combat. The small empty space to their right was so subtle that he nearly missed it. "Watch out!" he snapped to Mara, skidding to a halt and spinning to face that direction. Even as he brought his lightsaber up, a half-meter square concealed wall panel popped open and a weapon poked out. Behind it, in the shadowy alcove, he caught a glimpse of glowing red eyes and the glint of a nutrient frame above them. From behind Luke came the flash of blaster fire, not targeted between the glowing eyes as he might have expected, but above them. There was a sudden howl in his mind, and the zone of silence around the gunman abruptly vanished. There was a flash of blue as the alien weapon spat its fire towards Luke's chest, but too late. With the Ysalamир's bubble collapsed, Luke blocked the shot with ease. The gunman got off two more shots, also blocked, before the collapsing blue circles of a stun blast sent him slumping out of sight to the floor of his guard alcove. "Oh, good," Mara said, hefting her blaster and working the select switch. "The stun setting works on them." "That could be handy," Luke agreed, glancing around with eyes and mind. There were no other threats he could detect, at least not in the immediate area. "Any reason in particular why you didn't kill him?" "Hey, you're the one who wants me to start acting like a Jedi," Mara retorted, starting down the corridor again. R2 had gotten a few meters ahead and was twittering with nervous impatience as he swung his dome back around to look at them. "Problem is, the stun setting on this thing has about the range of a thrown bantha. If they're smart enough to keep their distance, you'll have to block their shots while I pick off the Ysalamiri." "Right," Luke said, frowning as he picked up his pace. There was something ominous growing behind the protection of Mara's mental barrier. A dark thought, or equally dark purpose. For a moment he considered asking her about it, but the fact that she was hiding it from him strongly suggested he should leave it alone. "Any idea what their plan is?" he asked instead as they caught up with R2. "Short term, to put us in deep storage for a few days," Mara said. "They figure making us go into healing trances is the easiest way to do that, hence the gunfire." "Friendly sorts," Luke murmured. "Yeah," Mara agreed. "Long term, they're waiting for Thrawn to return." There was a momentary flicker in her emotions, a deepening of that hidden darkness. "And since they think he may have popped up at Bastion, Parks decided to head out there and talk to them." Luke felt suddenly cold. "And turn this place over to the Empire?" The place and everything in it, Mara said grimly. That may not be what they think they're going to do, but once the Empire knows they're here, they'll get hold of it, one way or another. Ahead, R2 warbled and made a right turn into a cross corridor. Where are we going? Mara demanded as they followed. I don't know, Luke said, frowning. 20 meters ahead, the corridor ended in a T-junction, and for some unknown reason his mind flashed back to the Kavrilhu Pirates asteroid base and the very different T-junction at the far end of the Jedi trap they'd lured him into. Somewhere directly ahead, he could sense the blank area created by a group of Ysalamiri. And then R2 twittered uncertainly and rolled to a stop, facing the wall blocking their corridor in obvious confusion. R2, get back! Luke snapped, bringing up his lightsaber and taking a long step to put himself in front of Mara. It's a trap! Directly ahead, the wall exploded into a shower of dazzling sparks and completely disintegrated. And standing shoulder to shoulder together in the corridor behind what was left of the false wall, a dozen Ysalamiri-equipped Chiss opened fire. R2 squealed and swiveled around, racing back towards Luke as fast as he could, Child of Wind scrambling frantically to hang on. Luke barely noticed them, his whole attention focused ahead on the Chiss. He forced himself to relax, letting the Force guide his hands as it had in so many such battles, swinging his lightsaber into blocking position in front of each shot. But with the area around the Chiss closed to that subconscious prescience, a precious split second was being shaved off his normal preparation time. Behind him, Mara's blaster was flashing steadily over his shoulder, methodically picking off Ysalamiri. If he could keep up their defense long enough for her to finish the job. Somewhere at the edge of his mind, he could hear Child of Wind screeching something, but he had no concentration to spare for a translation. Ahead, through the massed line of Chiss, he could see what appeared to be movement behind them, and then, without warning, they dropped in unison to one knee, revealing another line of troops that had come up behind them. And suddenly there were twice as many bolts blazing his direction. Bolts he was slowly but steadily losing the race to stay ahead of. Behind him, Mara barked something, and through his haze of concentration, Luke saw one of the standing aliens jerk back and collapse as Mara abandoned her non-killing policy. Luke clenched his teeth and leaned into his effort, dimly realizing that if Park sent a team in front behind them right now, he and Mara would be finished. Child of Wind screeched again. And then, sweeping in from both directions down the cross corridor ahead, a group of Quam Jaw dove straight into the middle of the battle. The Chiss had no chance to react. Sweeping at full speed just over the heads of the standing warriors, the Quam Jaw grabbed the tops of their nutrient frames, the momentum yanking the gunmen off their feet and slamming them hard onto their backs on the floor. Let's go! Luke heard himself shout, breaking into a cautious jog towards the remaining row of kneeling Chiss. If he could get close enough to get them in range of Mara's stun setting. Half a corridor away, the Quam Jaw braked from their mad rush, swiveled around with impossible grace, and charged back at the kneeling gunmen from behind. Again they grabbed the nutrient frames as they passed, pulling the frames and the attached Chiss sprawling onto their faces. Luke let his lightsaber come to a stop, arm muscles starting to tremble with adrenaline and suddenly released tension. Mara had already sprinted past him, waving the Quam Jaw aside as her blaster swept its rings of blue stun fire across the downed Chiss. Even as Luke reached her side, the last of the gunmen twitched and stopped moving. That was fun, Mara gritted between clenched teeth, throwing a quick glance both directions down the corridor as she again worked her blaster's select switch. I hope they haven't got many more of these little traps set up. I don't think we've got far to go, Luke said, looking at R2. The little droid was already rolling down the cross corridor to their left, heading towards a large, heavy-looking door blocking off the end of the passage 15 meters away. A door, he noted, equipped with the same locking wheel and hand grip release system as those of the hidden stairway far behind them. Splitter of stones! Get your people together and follow us! He ran forward, closing down his lightsaber and clipping it onto his belt, reaching R2 as the droid slowed to a stop in front of the door. Turning the wheel, Luke squeezed the grips and pulled. The door swung ponderously open, letting in a rush of cool air. Skies of red blood, Keeper of Promises muttered in amazement. What place is this? Our way out, Luke told him, feeling a touch of the same awe as he gazed across the view in front of them. Stretching away across the black stone floor, parked close together like troops on parade, were multiple rows of small starships like the pair that had attacked him on his way to the planetary surface. Beside him, Mara whistled softly. The hangar didn't look this big from the outside, she said. It must stretch back farther than its roof indicated, Luke agreed, wondering how such a closely packed group of ships could ever be properly serviced. A glance upward gave him his answer. The entire area beneath the high ceiling was crammed with service, monitor, and fueling equipment, all held together by metal frames and a network of catwalks. There must be 100 of them here. At least, Mara agreed, and as she spoke, Luke could sense that secret darkness deepen within her. It was about time he asked her about it. There was a sudden flicker of sensation from behind him. Look out! Mara snapped, spinning around and firing a pair of quick shots past his shoulder through the open door. Luke turned too, snatching up his lightsaber and igniting it. A handful of Chiss were in the intersection they just left, scrambling reflexively out of the way of Mara's shots. Keep firing, Luke told her, giving the door a quick look. There was no locking wheel on the hangar side, but there was a small hole where one had apparently been removed. Experimentally, he turned the wheel a few degrees. Through the hole, the central axle of the locking mechanism could be seen turning. Perfect. He turned the wheel back to full open again, and with a quick slash of his lightsaber sliced it off flush with the door. Ducking under Mara's covering shots, he pushed the door closed. But it is still unlocked, Flyer Through Spikes objected. They could use the grip rocks to open it again. Not for long, Luke assured him. Crouching down, he gazed through the hole at the central axle and stretched out to the force. Without the wheel's leverage, it was much harder to turn, but the thought of armed Chiss descending on the hangar was more than enough incentive. 10 seconds later, the door was securely locked. That won't hold them for long, Mara warned. If nothing else, they can head over the roof on foot and come in on the other end. I know, Luke said, craning his neck to peer past the parked ships. She was right. As they'd guessed from their first look at the place, the whole front of the hangar was wide open, with only a slight overhang to protect it from rain or attack. The fortress's designers, he decided, must not have intended for their hangar to be packed this full. But it should slow them down long enough for us to borrow a ship and get out of here. Then all we'll have to worry about is whatever they've got in those towers, Mara said tartly, pushing past him and ducking between two of the ships. We'll have to take something from the front, she called back over her shoulder. I'll try to get one started. You make sure that door is secured, then find a way to keep the rest of that front row from taking off after us. Got it, Luke said. R2, take Child of Winds and follow Mara. Give her a hand figuring out the flight systems. Splitter of Stones, you and your people had better head out while you can. Thank you for your help. Our part is paid, Master Walker of Sky, the Quamjaw said, his tone just slightly ominous. It will now be your part to rid us of the threateners as you promised. With that, he and the others flapped away over the parked ships. We'll do our best, Luke murmured. He double-checked the door, then took another moment to stretch his thoughts back into the corridor. It was empty. Apparently the Chiss knew better than to waste their time with the impenetrable stone. Particularly with such an obvious alternative available. 30 seconds later, following the sound of R2's wheels across the black stone, he reached the front of the hangar. R2 and Child of Winds were there, the latter again scrabbling for balance on top of the droid as the dome swiveled back and forth. Luke looked along the front line of ships, noting a gap in the neat array where one was apparently missing. Mara, however, was nowhere to be seen. R2? Where's Mara? The droid warbled a negative, still looking around. Luke peered out into the dim sunlight and stretched out with the force. What are you waiting for? Mara demanded as she ran up from behind him. We need these ships disabled. We were waiting for you, Luke told her, frowning. The dark secret still loomed in her mind, but there was something new to the texture now. All tinges of uncertainty or doubt had disappeared, replaced by a heavy cloud of deep and bitter sadness. Something vitally important had just happened. Well, don't, she growled, slapping a release panel on the other side of the nearest ship. Above them, a hatchway swung open and a ladder unfolded to the floor. One of the ships seems to be missing, Luke pointed out. I know. Park mentioned it was on its way in, Mara said, swinging herself up onto the ladder. Nothing we can do about that one. Go on, get busy. She disappeared inside. Right, Luke murmured, reaching out with a force to lift R2 up and into the hatch behind her. Then, stepping to the next ship in line, he ran a quick eye over it. The fighter was 3 times the size of an X-Wing, with a set of 4 TIE Fighter solar panels melding into a disturbing flow of alien lines, and presumably with a set of repulsor lifts on the underside. He ducked under the bow. There they were, one pair running longitudinally along each side of the center line. The subtle but distinctive diamond pattern of repulsor lifts. 4 quick slashes with his lightsaber, and they were no longer functional. Ducking around the landing gear, he moved on to the next ship. He had disabled 7 of them, with another 7 to go, when he caught the change in Mara's emotional texture. Slowly, with the slightly awkward movements that came of a pilot unfamiliar with her craft, the ship lifted half a meter off the floor and eased forward. His comlink beeped. We've got company, Mara's voice announced tightly, and as Luke concentrated, he could sense both wary Chiss mines and Ysalamiri created blank areas approaching over the rooftop. Snap it up! I'll try to keep them busy. And she did. The interior of the hangar was flickering with reflected light from the firefight by the time Luke finished disabling the last of the fighters. Soft blue flashes from the Chiss hand weapons, a shaper and brighter blue from Mara's ship. Sharper, rather. Ready, he thought towards her, sprinting across the line of disabled ships towards the end of the hangar opening where most of the brighter flashes seemed to be coming from. He reached it, eased a careful eye around the corner. Get ready, Mara's acknowledgement flowed into his mind, and with a sandstorm blast of backwash, the ship dropped past the overhang and bounced to a rough landing in front of him. Luke was ready. Even as the ship bounced up again, he was sprinting around its tail to its far side. The hatchway Mara had used earlier was standing open. Throwing Jedi strength into his leg muscles, Luke leaped upward, catching the door and pulling himself inside to land in an undignified sprawl on the deck. Go! He shouted, stretching out with the force to pull the hatch closed. Mara needed no encouragement. Already the ship was jumping towards the sky, the roar of repulsor lifts not quite drowning the pinging of Chiss shots slapping into the underside and back. Are we safe? Child of Winds asked anxiously. He was pressed into the aftmost seat, his claws gripping the safety straps. I think so, Luke soothed him, listening to the fading pings of heat-stressed metal as Mara pulled for altitude. All they seem to have is anti-personnel weapons down there, unless they can get their heavier stuff online quickly. Luke, get up here, Mara's taut voice called back from the flight deck. Luke scrambled to his feet, his mind reaching out to Mara's. The dark thought was still there, lurking in the back of her mind, but it had now been superseded by something else. A tangle and mixture he couldn't decipher. He dodged past R2, gurgling pensively in a droid alcove, and dropped into the co-pilot seat beside Mara. What is it? He snapped. Look at the fortress, Mara told him, turning the ship into a slow rotation. What, the weapon towers? Luke asked, stretching out with the force as he looked down at the structure, turning lazily into view out the canopy. He couldn't see or sense any indication they were preparing to fire. He glanced at Mara's board, searching for the sensor displays. Forget the logistics and strategy for a minute, Mara said curtly. Look at the fortress. Just look at it. Luke felt his forehead wrinkling as he gazed down through the canopy again. It was a fortress. Walls, a flat, roundish angled roof with a hangar in the middle, 4 weapons towers following the curve of the road and back, 1 intact tower farther down in front. Look at it, Mara said again, very softly. And with a sudden shock, he saw it. Stars of Alderaan, he breathed. It's almost funny, isn't it? Mara said, her voice sounding strange. We automatically dismissed the whole idea that it could be some kind of superweapon. Thrawn never used superweapons, we all said. And yet that's exactly what it is. The only kind of superweapon someone like Thrawn ever used. The only kind he ever needed. Luke thought about that galaxy hollow in the command center, and all the planets and resources Thrawn had gathered under his control. Enough to tip the balance of power in any direction its inheritors chose. Information, he said, a shiver running through him. Mara nodded. Information. Luke nodded, back, gazing down at the fortress now receding into the surrounding hills, as Mara pulled the ship away again. The flat-roofed fortress with its 4 towers in back and 1 in front, stretching upward towards the sky, looking for all the world like 4 fingers and a thumb reaching to pluck the stars from the sky. The hand of Thrawn. Just under a kilometer away from the fortress, shielded from view by a craggy ridge, was a deep indentation in the cliff face. Mara maneuvered the ship carefully in beneath the overhang and eased it as far back against the wall as she could. That's it, she said, shutting down the repulsor lifts and feeling herself slump with fatigue and release tension. For the moment, at least, they were safe. For the moment. From the aft seat, Child of Winds said something. Almost intelligibly this time, but Mara was too tired to even try to decipher it. What did he say? She asked. He asked what we're going to do now, Luke translated. A good question, actually. Well, for right now, we're just going to sit here, Mara said, running a critical eye over Luke's outfit. There were a half-dozen new scorch marks where the Chiss's Charok shots had made it through his defenses, and she could sense his automatic and almost unconscious suppression of the pain. Looks to me like you could use a few hours in a healing trance. That can wait, Luke said, gazing through the canopy at the landscape beyond the overhang, fading into the growing darkness of evening. My damage to their repulsor lifts won't hold them for long. We have to get back in there before they can mount an aerial search for us. Actually, I don't think they'll bother, Mara said, waving at her control board. For one thing, the sensors on these things seem to be pretty useless for close-order ground searches. My guess is that they'll move troops into the area where they think we've stashed our ships and leave it at that. You don't think they'll worry we might get back inside? And do you? Luke frowned. What do you mean? Mara took a deep breath. I mean, I'm not sure we should even try to interfere with what they're doing. Child of Winds made a noise like a choked-off comment. Luke glanced back at him, then turned again to Mara. But they're enemies of the New Republic, he said. Aren't they? Mara shook her head. I don't know. Just because they're in Imperial uniforms. She sighed. Look, Baron Fell was in there. The same Baron Fell who turned his back on the Empire years ago when he finally recognized how corrupt and vicious things had become under Isard and some of Palpatine's other successors. Yet here he is, wearing an Imperial uniform again. Brain twisting is useless against a man like him. You'd ruin the fine combat edge that makes him useful to you in the first place. Something must have happened to legitimately change his mind. Thrawn? In a way, Mara said. Fell said Thrawn took him to the unknown regions and showed him around, and that was when he agreed to rejoin. She could feel Luke's emotions darken. There's something out there, isn't there? He said quietly. Something terrible. According to the Chiss, there are 100 terrible somethings out there, Mara said. Of course, that is only the Chiss talking. Odds are that a lot of the dangers would be pretty harmless to something with the size and resources of the New Republic. Threats we could swat without any trouble if they ever ventured in past the Outer Rim. She shrugged uncomfortably. On the other hand, Fell knows our resources as well as we do, Luke finished for her. And yet he's here. Mara nodded. He and Park are both here. And neither of them seems to have any interest in wasting their resources and actions against the New Republic. That says a lot right there. For a long minute the ship was silent. Then Luke stirred. Unfortunately, there's still one more point we have to consider, he said. Bastion and the Empire. You said Park was going to open contact with them? Yes, Mara confirmed, the quiet ache within her deepening. And I don't trust the current Imperial leadership to see things with the same long-term perspective that Fel does. You give them the Hand of Thrawn, and they will move against Coruscant. Luke gazed out the canopy again. We can't let that happen, he said quietly. Not with the new Republic in the state it's in. Especially not if those resources are needed to battle some other threat, Mara agreed, unstrapping her restraints. Which unfortunately means we have to get back in there and pull copies of that data for ourselves. At least then we'll have a chance of blocking whatever Bastion does to pull them in on the Imperial side. She could sense Luke forcing the tiredness from his mind. You're right, he said, as he started unfastening his own straps. If we can get R2 to a computer jack so we can download everything. Hold it, Mara said, reaching over and putting a restraining hand on his arm. I didn't mean right this minute. We're not going anywhere until you get those burns healed. They're nothing, Luke protested, glancing down across the scorch marks. I can handle them. Oh, bravely said, Mara said, fatigue and her private pain adding an unintended note of scorn into her voice. Let me rephrase that. I'm not going anywhere with you until you're healed. You were just barely able to keep ahead of that last attack. I don't want any of your attention wasted on old injuries you could have gotten rid of with a few hours' rest. Understand? He glared at her, but behind the glare she could sense his grudging agreement. All right, you win, he said with a sigh, resettling himself into his seat. But you wake me right away if anything happens. I'll set up the phrase, welcome back, to snap me out of it. Mara nodded. Got it. And even if nothing happens, wake me up in 2 hours, he added, closing his eyes. It won't take them more than a few hours to get enough of the damaged ships out of the way to free up the ones in back. We'll need to get back there before then if we're going to stop Park from handing all this over to Bastion. Without waiting for a reply, he took another deep breath and leaned back against the headrest. His thoughts and emotions cleared and faded, and he was gone. Don't worry about Bastion, Mara said softly. I'll take care of it. For a moment she sat there in the silence, gazing at his sleeping face, a tangle of emotions twisting through the darkness of her private agony. 10 years now they'd known each other. Years that could have been filled with camaraderie and friendship. Years Luke had effectively wasted with his own lonely and arrogantly stupid wanderings through completely unnecessary pain and doubt. She ran a fingertip gently across his forehead, brushing back a few loose strands of hair. And yet, after all that, here they were together again, and the man she'd once so highly respected and cared for was finally back on his proper path. Or perhaps it was the two of them together who were on their proper path. Perhaps. Behind her came a tentative questioning warble. It's just a healing trance, Mara assured the droid, pushing the last of her straps away and getting out of her seat. He'll be all right. You watch over things in here, okay? The droid twittered again, his tone suddenly suspicious. I'm going outside, Mara told him, making sure her sleeve blaster and lightsaber were secure. Don't worry, I'll be back. She slid past him, ignoring his sudden flurry of comments and questions, and popped the hatch. Child of Winds brushed past her as the ladder unfolded, chirping rapidly for a few seconds and then flapping off into the deepening darkness. A darkness matched by the ache deep within her. For a moment she looked back at the top of Luke's head, visible over the chair's headrest, wondering if he had guessed her plan. But no. She'd carefully held it secret within her, behind the mental barriers Palpatine had so long ago taught her how to create. The old Luke, the one obsessed with solving every problem himself, might have forced his way in through those barriers to demand the truth. The new Luke, she knew, would never do such a thing. Later, probably, he would regret not having done so. But by then it would be too late. The simple fact was that Park and the Chiss had to be prevented from giving the Empire the secrets of this place, and it was up to her to stop them, however she could. whatever the cost. The droid had run out of words and was watching her, his stance somehow reminding her of that of a frightened child. Don't worry, she soothed him quietly. It'll be all right. Watch over him, okay? The droid gave a forlorn moan of agreement. Stretching out with the Force, Mara turned and headed down the ladder. However she could. Whatever the cost. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.